So I'd like to welcome our speaker tonight, I keep saying it wrong, I want to make sure I say it right. Flaherty.
That's a southern pronunciation.
Yeah. I keep saying Flaherty in my head. Anne Flaherty is a great-great-granddaughter of John Kehoe. She received her bachelor's degree from the College of Notre Dame at Baltimore. She attended the University of Maryland School of Law for 1 year. Ms. Flaherty has spent more than 2 decades researching and documenting Pennsylvania's Molly-Maguire conflict. Online publication of her work can be found at the blog From John Kehoe's Cell. In 2013, Ms. Flaherty formed the Kehoe Foundation as a 501c3. In 2023, she formed Hibernian Press and published The Passion of John Kehoe and the Myth of the Molly-Maguires, which is the book we have here today. And this book received the Anthracite Heritage Foundation Book Award for 2025. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Anne Flaherty.
Thanks to Felicia. Thanks to the Historical Society for the invitation to speak and for all they do to preserve this incredibly rich history. Before I speak, I'd like to introduce Dave Moore, who is a native of Pottsville, served as state parole agent for Schuylkill County from 1974 to 1984, and was the advisor to the Pennsylvania Board of Pardons in 1978 when he recommended the posthumous pardon for John Kehoe. And Dave will tell us a little bit about that right now.
Okay. Pardon me if I sit. I'm still getting back from spinal surgery. Anne and I thought it might be interesting for you to hear how a local guy got involved with the Kehoe posthumous pardon. My name's Dave Moore, Pottsville High, class of '62. Married name now, David Thor Stratton Moore. After graduating from Pottsville High, did a full enlistment in the Navy before I went to Muhlenberg College. Right out of Muhlenberg College, I started as a state parole agent for the Pennsylvania Board of Probation and Parole. So most of our work was, of course, supervising people on parole and probation under state supervision, and I ended up covering all of Schuylkill County. But back in the day, one of our other responsibilities, not that we didn't have enough supervising 70 or 80 convicted felons, was we were the investigative arm for the Pennsylvania Board of Pardons. So occasionally, the board would send a request to the state parole board for an independent investigation of a request for clemency that was received. So after the Kehoe family did a wonderful job presenting a very powerful petition to the Board of Pardons, it was accepted and then put out for investigation. So guess where the investigation request ended up? On my desk. So I looked at this request and I thought, wait a minute, this person's been dead for 100 years. Who the heck am I going to interview? He's dead, the witnesses are dead, family members at the time are dead. Anyway, all I can do is see if there's notes of testimony, look at the trial transcript. So up to the courthouse I go, up here to the clerk of criminal court's office. Johnny Howells was the chief clerk, who I knew well. And I go in and say, John, do you have anything on the Kehoe trial? He said, yeah, follow me over into the archive part of the office. Sits me down at the table. He gets this big leather-bound book down, opens it up, because apparently the family had already researched the notes of testimony. But I read through the notes of testimony of the trial, which anybody can do. It's up in the courthouse. Very legible. I read through every word that was spoken at that trial and said, wait a minute. wait a minute. There was only one real person testifying, and that was a prosecution person named McFarland, who was an agent for the Pinkerton organization. There were no other witnesses presented, no evidence presented. So I finished reading this and said, whoa, there's nothing here. So basically, all I did was write back to the Board of Pardons and said, this would never result in a conviction today in a criminal court. No how, no way. This is a textbook study in perjury. It was sheer perjury. So apparently that had some impact, and the Board of Pardons approved the five or six member board at the time. They approved it, went to Governor Shapp, and he, of course, approved it right away. Much more detail in Ann's book about the trial and how that whole thing went down. One little postscript to the whole thing, which you might find interesting. I don't know if I mentioned this to Ann. If I recall, the district attorney at the time was Dick Russell. And a couple months after the pardon was granted, I went to Dick and said, have any of the other families, there were 20 other men that were, like I say, executed by the courts illegally, improperly, did any of them apply for a pardon? And Dick said, he kind of dropped his head a little, he said, the District Attorneys Association asked that no more application for pardon be accepted because it's making us look bad. So that's it. How did I get mixed up with this crew here and now? Retiring, I did a 42-year career with the board, and after I retired, reading something on the Molly Maguires from another source, and Joe Wayne's address, and the address of Hibernia House was listed. I thought maybe the family would be interested to talk to the person who did the report for the Board of Pardons. And Joe and I finally caught up with each other, and we've been in close touch since. I think you'll find this presentation extremely fascinating, and please keep in the back of your mind about, could something like this happen today? And if you read the book, I think you'll see where that's going. But anyway, if you have any other questions about the Board of Pardon process, I'll of course stick around afterwards, and we'll talk. So,
Show your shirt.
thank you for listening.
Was the trial here in this courthouse?
Pardon?
Was the trial here in this courthouse?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what
Courthouse. The courthouse, the prior courthouse in Pottsville.
Was where the trial was?
Yes, but that courthouse was
Not this
knocked
one.
down, and it's a parking lot next to the prison.
And I'm not sure you all caught what he said. He served Schuylkill County for 10 years, but he was in state service for 42. 42 years as a state parole officer.
Thank you. After coming out, I'll be honest, after coming out of graduate school, I've been an agent since 1969. Federal funds were available, went to graduate school. And after I came out of graduate school, I found out that none of my fellow agents in the Allentown office knew anything, really knew Schuylkill County. I'm a native of Schuylkill County, knew anything, didn't want it. So I said, I'll cover Schuylkill County, and it was back home again, and great career.
Meant to be.
So, yeah, a lot of war stories.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you. Okay.
Thanks.
So we're here to talk about John Kehoe. I had a professor a few months ago ask me to do a short bio, and I thought, well, that's the hardest assignment I ever got in my life. Oh, I should say that Joe Wayne was very conducive to securing the pardon all those many years ago. So thanks to Joe Wayne for that. So who was John Kehoe? People have been arguing for a century and a half as to who this man was. As his great-great-granddaughter, I've been researching it for more than 20 years. A few things people agree on, not many. All of the men charged as Mollies belonged to the ancient order of Hibernians, which was an Irish Catholic benevolent order. All were convicted in whole or in part on testimony delivered by Pinkerton operative James McParland. McParland infiltrated the AOH lodges as an undercover agent and became a member. The trials spanned more than a half decade, from the mid to the late 1870s. They centered on 11 murders dating from 1862 to 1875. The victims included a number of mine officials. In the trials, the railroad and coal interests installed their own prosecutors, used private police to make the arrests, denied defendants the right to testify. That's why there was no other evidence. Jailed defense witnesses for perjury. They used Pinkerton operatives to supply the names of defendants, draft the arrest warrants, draft the prosecution testimony, serve as prosecution witnesses, and advise the Board of Pardons on pending cases. So we had a pretty complete seizure of the court system. Trials were held in 5 counties, here in Schuylkill, as well as Carbon, Columbia, Luzerne, and Northumberland counties. 21 AOH men were executed from 1877 to 1879. At least 50 more were imprisoned. We've had a few technical difficulties, so I'm losing parts of the screen, but we'll move on. This was Martin Ritt's film from 1970. Sean Connery played Kehoe. The family was so excited when they heard that until they saw the movie. This portrayed Kehoe around the time of his arrest. He would have been 39 years of age. The film credits say that this was suggested by a book by Arthur Lewis. Google Books describes Lewis's book, Lament for the Molly Maguires, as, quote, activities of a terrorist organization of Irish miners in the coal regions of Pennsylvania. So we have Kehoe portrayed as a terrorist miner in Ritt's film. This was my first introduction to Kehoe in print. It's from Alan Pinkerton's dime novel. So we've got a dime novel pretty much as the basis for this history. I think that's where a lot of the confusion comes in. Kehoe was now self-crowned king of the Mollies. They moved promptly as puppets. When he commanded a halt, the mysterious clan paused in its deadly work. So, excuse me. This was, oh boy. This was the,
Excuse me. When you're standing there, they can't see it from over there. Just,
this was the most extreme, I've lost my voice now. I'll push through. The most extreme example of nativist cartooning. Oh, oh, thank you.
Here's another one.
Oh. This is from Harper's Weekly. The illustrator Thomas Nast. Irishman threatening Lady Liberty with a knife. I also found from the Pottsville Standard a year later, the Standard was warning residents about a resurgence of know-nothingism, anti-Irish hostility against political candidates. The Standard went so far as to reprint the oath from 1854, which read in part, "I further declare and swear that I will use all means in my power to counteract and destroy the influence of foreigners and Roman Catholics in the administration of the government of the United States." So we've got extreme animus in Schuylkill County 4 years before the trials began. Kehoe himself, born in County Wicklow, 1837, to Bridget and Joseph, second eldest of an eventual family of 8 children. Family emigrated to the U.S. in 1860, presumably to Schuylkill County. I don't know whether Kehoe served as a child laborer. It's possible that he did. He worked his way up from the mines to the position of miner, became a naturalized U.S. citizen, married Mary Ann O'Donnell, who was born in Pennsylvania, and became a tavern owner. So we've got an American dream profile here. One generation up from the mines, small business owner. Also elected official, 1875 and 76, elected High Constable of Girardville. Kehoe's father, Joseph, worked as a mine laborer, also served as a constable in Mahanoy City and as a township supervisor. So the Kehoe men were law and order men, and they had politics in their blood. As father of a growing family, Kehoe operated hotel taverns in Mahanoy City, Shenandoah, before moving his family to Girardville and purchasing the hotel that he named Hibernian House. Most notably, he served as AOH delegate for Schuylkill County from 1874 to 76. So at the time of his arrest, Kehoe was both a constable and county delegate for the AOH. So the question is, what is this ancient order? Am I in the way?
Well, it moves. If we want to move it forward, we can, whatever we need to do.
Is that better? This is the New York's officers on parade on St. Patrick's Day, 1875. Mayor Wickham is tipping his hat to these men. That's an indication of their political prowess. I found that there was a long relationship between AOH men from Schuylkill County and AOH men from New York City. In 1836, both groups joined together to bring the order into the country. One influential Molly said of the order, "We contributed toward the support of the sick and the burial of the dead." So, benevolent order. So the collaboration between New York and Pennsylvania continued In March of 71, 4 years before that parade took place, AOH men in New York and Pennsylvania filed revised charters with their state legislatures. The language in this is moving, so moving I thought of it as a creed. The poem from the preamble reads, "These laws, though human, spring from love divine. Love laid the scheme, love guides the whole design." From the introduction, brethren, the Supreme Being has placed man in a state of dependence and need of mutual support from his fellow man, has implanted in our natures tender sympathies and most humane feeling towards our fellow creatures in distress, and all the happiness that human nature is capable of enjoying must flow and terminate in the love of God and our fellow creatures. So we've got profound language here. I tried to find out who drafted this. One of the Philadelphia papers at the time of the Molly arrests said that men arrested as Mollies had drafted this language, but I've not been able to verify that. Through all these years of research, I found that many of the Irishmen charged as Mollies were not minors at all. If they had been minors, they'd worked their way out of the mines, as Kehoe had, and were area businessmen. They ran small hotels, taverns. They also served as political delegates to the Democratic Party, tax assessors, tax collectors, township supervisors, high constables, as Kehoe did. One was overseer of the poor. Most notably, at least 4 were union officers. At least 4 were officers in the Working Men's Benevolent Association, the WBA. At least 5 had been elected as school directors. So these Irishmen were not thugs, and they were not oppressed mine workers. So we need a new explanation for what went on. That's where our, there should be a clip of a newspaper there. So I'll tell you what it says. I found this charter from 1871 with this profound language and wondered if any activity in the coal region corresponded to that. I found this clip in the Boston Pilot. It described events that took place in Mahanoy City in February of 1871. There was a work stoppage. The miners were concerned that the cost of coal would escalate due to the work stoppage. They were worried that the poor of the eastern cities, as they said, would suffer from the increased cost of coal, and they were offering to give 1 or 2 days of work in the mines, as they said, free gratis, to supply coal to the poor. They wanted the operators to open their mines for this, and they wanted the railroad men to ship the coal for free. That did not happen. Kehoe lived in Mahanoy City at the time this resolution came out. His father and 2 brothers also lived in Mahanoy City. All 3 of those men were miners. So we've got the miners with their benevolent charter offering to work for free. Franklin Gowan, head of the regional coal combination, I think as a result of the miners' activity, did not consent to ship the coal for free to the poor of the eastern cities. He doubled and then tripled his freight rates overnight. So the miners, again from Mahanoy City, turned to Governor Geary, preferred formal charges against the coal combination. Again, these were not oppressed mine workers. They were not afraid to go after the most powerful men in the region. They asserted that the abrupt rise in freight rates violated company charters. So we're back to the charter issue. These miners believed in the sanctity of charters. And again, Mahanoy City, where Kehoe lived at that time. I came to this history through, of course, my family. Two of my great aunts in particular believed strenuously that the motives behind this prosecution were political. So I paid special attention to political races when I did the research. Here you'll see John Kehoe of Shenandoah. Kehoe had moved his family to Shenandoah by 1872. He's placed his name in consideration for state assembly. He is a political hopeful. So here's the letter that I believe is still archived at the Society. I first saw this letter in the early 1970s when the movie came out. It gives a lot of clues into Kehoe's political activities. He's writing to John Ryan. He's writing to Ramsey Potts. He's trying to get help for the commutation of his death sentence. John W. Ryan will take my case before the board. I must write to all my friends to try and do what they can for me. I will write to John W. Morgan. John W. Morgan was a Welsh miner turned Republican state assemblyman. The National Labor Tribune called him a warm friend. He said he would write to Dr. McKibben. David McKibben was a physician in Schuylkill County and a sitting state assemblyman, Democratic. I will write a long letter to John W. Killinger. Him and me used to be good old friends. John W. Killinger was a U.S. congressman, a Republican, from Pennsylvania's 14th district. A coal region paper called Killinger a champion of labor. So these men are all labor, and they are all political. 1874, 2 years before the Molly trials began, Congressman John W. Killinger brings a bill to the floor of the House in Washington. He's calling for cooperative ownership of the U.S. railway system. So Kehoe's good old friend is going right up against the coal and railroad monopolists in Pennsylvania's hard-cold region and throughout the country, really. A local paper said of his bill, it strikes an effective blow against the railroad monopolies of the land and is, in the true sense of the term, a people's measure. So the bill, the language of the bill called for as few as 10 men to be authorized to own and operate a stretch of rail. So this was a really dramatic idea. The two men at the center of the conflict. Gowan is president of the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad and its Coal and Iron Company, head of the coal combination. This quote comes from 1878. Gowan was discussing the trials with a local priest, Father Gallagher of Pottsville. And Gallagher told Gowan he did not think John Hartranft would sign Kehoe's death warrant because there was such scant evidence against him. Gowan stood up, struck the desk with his fist, and said, "Damn the governor. If he don't hang Kehoe, we will hang him." So this was a personal animus. Kehoe, this quote is from 1877. Kehoe spoke with a reporter, I think the week after the first mass executions right here at Pottsville. he described Gowan as, quote, a man of restless, arbitrary ambition with such grasping tendencies that no obstacle, however sacred, was ever allowed to interpose between him and his end. So, if Kehoe's good old friend, John W. Killinger, was calling for cooperative ownership of the U.S. railway system, that's one reason Gowan had good reason to hate Kehoe, as he did. Gowan was lead prosecutor during the trials. It was Gowan who hired the Pinkertons, brought them into the region, and paid them through the Philadelphia and Reading Coal and Iron Company. We lost McFarland. Here we have Alan Pinkerton. 1873, he wrote a letter to his superintendent in New York. Quote, it looks as if I were going to go down with money enough due me to pay all my debts and a great deal more, yet still I am unable to raise scarcely enough to buy a dinner. Two days later, Pinkerton wrote to Bangs, suggest some things to Mr. Gowan. I have no doubt he will give us work. So Pinkerton solicited the caseload from Gowan. 5 months later, he sent McFarland to the region. 8 murders took place after McFarland came into the coal fields. Only 5 of these came to trial, and the other 3, I think, were simply ignored, never followed up on. 2 versions of McFarland that came long after the Molly trials. There were 2 famous Pinkerton labor caseloads. The first was against the so-called Mollies. The second was against the Western Federation of Miners in the early 1900s. McFarland was involved in both caseloads. In the West, Clarence Darrow defended, and McFarland was pretty much discredited. McFarland was involved in something in Parsons, Kansas in the 1880s. I haven't been able to find out what he was, but it was so nefarious that the citizens remembered him well enough to draft this resolution, a resolution decades later, when McFarland was involved in the Western Federation caseload. The Parsons resolution said of McFarland, we unhesitatingly declare that where there is a money consideration, he will do anything, no matter how low or evil, to accomplish his purpose. There is not today in the United States outside prison walls a more conscienceless and desperate criminal than McFarland. So that was Parsons. What Darrow said in one of the Western Federation cases was, quote, now the state wants this jury to say that if this man McFarland says that a human being shall live, he shall live. That if this man McFarland says that a human being shall die, he must die. That is all that they want in this case. And that was essentially the way the Molly caseload was conducted. The most confusing thing about this history and researching this history is that you never know if what you're reading is fact or fiction, because both were prevalent. So 1874, there was a nominating convention at Pottsville. Christopher Donnelly, who served with Kehoe as AOH treasurer, was also a school director and a miner. He attended as a delegate. Donnelly delivered 39.5 votes to the nomination of James Riley. Riley won the nomination and the election. The day after that convention took place, the New York Herald published this fiction. This was 2 years before the trials began. 1 year before, I think, 6 of the murders had taken place that drove the trials. So this seems to be appearing out of nowhere, this coverage about the coal regions, riot, robbery, murder, mutilations, Ku Klux notices. They ran this kind of coverage throughout the fall. A priest from Mahanoy City finally wrote and said, I've officiated here for years. I know nothing of this group called Molly Maguires. The people here are intelligent, law-abiding. But nonetheless, the New York papers published this. It wasn't just the Herald. And this coverage was picked up and circulated all over the country. I found it in Tennessee, Kentucky, Chicago, you name it. Throughout Pennsylvania, of course, Boston, South Carolina, West Virginia. A number of papers picked it up and published it in German, and they did that in Baltimore. So before the trials began, before even the murders in the this decade began, the public is being groomed about the supposed existence of a band of murderous Irish thugs who have overtaken Pennsylvania's hard coal region. This was very effective propaganda. And during the trials, Gowan said, quote, through the instrumentality of their order and by its power, they were able to secure offices for themselves. So these AOH men charged as Mollies were not only securing political offices locally, they were influencing national races as well. I also found that a number of AOH men charged as Mollies were involved in what they called Labor Reform Party politics. James Carroll, Thomas Fisher, John Slattery, Christopher Donnelly here, others probably as well. Alec Campbell, I'm guessing, was. So I'm finding all this labor activity, progressive political activity. What else was happening in the politics? 1869, Asa Packer, owner of the Lehigh Valley Railroad, member of Gowan's Coal Combination, lost the race to John Geary. John Geary was the governor who had helped the miners bring their legislative challenge against the coal combination. The New York Tribune says about Packer, the men who dig the coal know Asa Packer. They could not feel he was their man. Not a working man's candidate. 2 years after the race, John Geary spoke to a New York Herald reporter. He told the reporter, thus far they, meaning the labor reformers, have as a general thing gone with the Republican Party. They have saved our elections several times in this state. In 1869, they supported me against Asa Packer. So the party that I'm finding these AOH men attached to, the labor reformers, is helping to keep the railroad men out of office. Packer lost the election in '69. In 1876, he sent his corporate counsel, Alan Craig, to help with the prosecution in Carbon County. So that's 69. 72, railroad attorney Charles Buckaloo lost the race. These men are Democrats. This from the Mauchunk Coal Gazette. The 30 or 40,000 anthracite miners and laborers are a unit against the Democratic Party for putting such an uncompromising foe to labor upon the ticket. Again from the Coal Gazette, Buckaloo is acknowledged to be the attorney of the Reading Railroad Company. He was their agent while in the Senate and Frank Gowan's right-hand man generally. So Gowan's own man has been defeated. Buckaloo lost in 72. In 1877, he served as a prosecutor in Columbia County. He helped secure Patrick Hester's death sentence. 75, Cyrus Pershing loses the race. Pershing was Gowan's man. Gowan actually brought him into Schuylkill County in 1872 in an election, I use that with quotes, installed him as the president judge of Schuylkill's Court of Oyer and Terminer. Pershing had never set foot in Schuylkill County prior to that time. So Gowan brought him in 72, installed him as judge. 3 years later, Pershing ran for the governorship. After Kehoe was executed, there was a lot of back and forth in the papers about the fact that Kehoe and his AOH colleague, John Slattery, had helped to campaign against Pershing. They said they would do all they could against him so far as possible, even without getting a cent toward expenses. So, in a showcase Molly Maguire trial, Gowan said of the AOH, "I have seen this organization wield a political power in the state which has controlled the election of a great commonwealth," and I think this was the race he was referring to. So Pershing lost in 75. Starting in 76 and onwards, he served as the judge whose court sentenced more men to death than any other court, and that included John Kehoe. So we lost Robert Mackey. I found one really provocative clue about Kehoe's relationship with the Republican Party. Robert Mackey, who died, I think, the month after Kehoe was executed. When Mackey died, the New York Times called him Pennsylvania's noted political chieftain, so he was a big wheel in Republican politics. This from 1905. Exhaustive efforts were made on the part of Mackey and others to save the life of Kehoe, but Hartranft yielded to these importunities only to the extent of delaying the execution. So evidently, Robert Mackey, leading Republican operative, along with others, made exhaustive efforts to try to save the life of Kehoe. That's a very provocative statement. I've not been able to really follow up on that. But it seems that Kehoe, possibly in his capacity as AOH delegate, was helping to spin Democratic votes, which had been traditionally Irish Catholic votes. The Democratic Party could count on these votes over a period of decades. He is evidently helping to spin these toward the Republican Party. So Pershing lost the election on November 2nd. 5.5 weeks later, there was an attack at Wiggins Patch where Kehoe's mother-in-law kept a boarding house, Margaret O'Donnell. A gang of more than 40 armed men swarmed into the village at 2 in the morning. 6 or 7 entered Margaret O'Donnell's house. They shot Ellen McAllister, Kehoe's 19-year-old or 21-year-old sister-in-law, young mother who was visibly pregnant. She was standing at her bedroom door in her nightdress when she was murdered. These men ordered the men who were sleeping upstairs down into the yard, where they shot and killed Charles O'Donnell, Kehoe's 19-year-old brother-in-law, and set his body on fire. Margaret O'Donnell received a heavy blow during the raid. She identified Frank Wenrich, who was a butcher from Mahanoy City, as her assailant. Wenrich was a lieutenant in the Silliman Guards, which was a militia that had mustered a few weeks before at Mahanoy City. Now, Kehoe at this time is serving as High Constable of Girardville. So he arrests Frank Wenrich, prefers charges against him. Wenrich appears before Pershing's court. Charges are dismissed. No other action is ever brought in terms of the Wiggins Patch murders. So on the word mostly of James McParland, Kehoe, along with a number of his AOH colleagues, are arrested, charged with capital crimes, conspiracy to commit murder, most of the early trials. And the official trial transcript did what newspapers have been trying to do for decades, really. They're conflating membership in the Ancient Order of Hibernians with Molly Maguire terrorism. The official transcript read, the Commonwealth versus John Kehoe, members of the Ancient Order, commonly known as Molly Maguire. So there's the conflation. Kehoe himself told a reporter, I've never had justice. The newspapers and the people are down on me because they say I'm a Molly. And to say that in Schuylkill County of a man is about as good as signing his death warrant. At the time this trial took place, the AOH in the U.S. numbered about 450,000 members. In 1884, 8 years later, it numbered about 114,000 members. So these trials and accusations of Molly Maguireism decimated the order. It lost 75% of its membership in less than a decade. This goes to the newspaper coverage of the time. John Swinton served at different times as chief of the editorial staff for the New York Times and the New York Sun. During his tenure at the Sun, that paper ran some of the worst Molly Maguire propaganda. Swinton wrote to the Board of Pardons after the first mass hangings, quote, I beseech you to save my country and your state from the terrible wrong and appalling disgrace of these executions. I beseech you to exercise clemency, which in this case I believe to be justice, toward the so-called Molly Maguires, now under condemnation. In the 1880s, Swinton attended a dinner for newsmen in New York. He told them, quote, there is no such thing in America as an independent press unless it is in the small towns. There is not one of you who dares to write your honest opinions. The business of the New York journalist is to destroy the truth, to lie outright, to pervert, to vilify, to fawn at the feet of Mammon, and to sell his race and his country for his daily bread. We are the tools and vassals of rich men behind the scenes. We are the jumping jacks, they pull the strings, and we dance. Our talents, our possibilities, and our lives are all the property of other men. We are intellectual prostitutes.
You got it.
I think he wrote a book. It's probably worth getting. So Kehoe is hanged. He declares his innocence from the gallows. His daughter Margaret is my great-grandmother. He was the 17th of 21 AOH men to be executed, father of one son and 4 daughters at the time. all under the age of 12. I think Margaret was aged 10. All of Kehoe's children married. All 4 daughters had a son they named John. So this whole search is about motivation, really. What motivated all of these men? This is what Kehoe was reading before his execution. Newsmen found a number of items in a little prison library, and they gave the titles. One title was The Poor Man's Catechism, which at first I thought, was like the Baltimore Catechism, but it turned out to be the treatise from the 1798 Irish Rebellion against England. And the tenet of the catechism is, quote, I believe in the Irish Union, in the supreme majesty of the people, in the equality of man, in the lawfulness of the insurrection, and of resistance to oppression. A second volume found in Kehoe's cell, and I found this book at Catholic U, was a biography of St. Alphonsus Liguori, who was the founder of the Redemptorist order. And I read a good bit of this. Alphonsus was persecuted by the clergy, as was Kehoe, abandoned by his followers, as was Kehoe, and devoted to the Blessed Mother. Before Kehoe's execution at Pottsville Jail, 6 nuns, I think from St. Clair and Pottsville, decorated a cell with white muslin. They adorned the muslin with evergreens. And on the morning of the execution, a priest said 2 masses in that cell with the nuns, Kehoe's wife, Marianne Kehoe, and another AOH defendant and his wife in attendance. At the end of the second mass, a reporter stated, quote, Kehoe expressed his satisfaction that the day was one of the Virgin Mary's feast days, for, he said, he had great confidence in her intercessory power. So, a man of faith. So, in addition to Kehoe's arrest of Frank Wenrich after Wiggins Patch, I found numerous examples of Kehoe as an advocate of nonviolence. In August of 1875, as High Constable of Girardville, Kehoe made an arrest after one of the so-called Molly murders. The local paper said, while on the way to the justice's office, the constable, Kehoe, and his prisoner were surrounded by an excited crowd who brandished revolvers and knives and threatened to take the prisoner's life. Another tragedy was only prevented by the coolness and courage of the officer of the law. In March of 1875, Kehoe led a St. Patrick's Day parade of hundreds of AOH men dressed in regalia through the streets of Mahanoy City. Newspapers described the marchers as strikingly dignified and manly. In October of 1875, a reporter for the Shenandoah Herald, virulently anti-Kehoe, called for lynchings after a number of so-called Molly Maguire murders. Kehoe wrote to Foster, the articles which have appeared on this matter have done an incalculable amount of harm. And as a friend to law and order, I would advise their cessation. He described the AOH as, quote, a chartered organization recognized by the Commonwealth, composed of men who are law-abiding and seek the elevation of their members. That same fall, Kehoe said of a Girardville resident whom he suspected of agitating for vigilantism, quote, it would be more charitable for him or any other correspondent to encourage brotherly love. So we're back to the charter. Instead of sowing seeds of antagonism, which sooner or later may lead to bloodshed. And finally, from his letter to his friend, the Quaker attorney, Ramsey Potts, quote, "I never thought that men would be so wicked. They swore every way they wanted them. I would sooner die than swear a willful lie on my fellow man." So he died on the gallows in a snowstorm at Pottsville. He wore a rosary around his neck and a nosegay from his wife in his lapel. And as to the question, who was John Kehoe? From the evidence I discovered, I believe him, along with many of his AOH fellows, to have been not terrorist miners, but pacifists and men of deep faith who were wrongfully accused, wrongfully prosecuted, and wrongfully executed. Thank you.